All right, back for another beer review, and today I'll be reviewing yet another beer from the Southern Tier Brewing Company, and they're out of Lakewood, New York, and this is their Harvest, and this is the 2022 release. So they're calling this an Autumn IPA, and more on that momentarily. It comes in at 6.7% alcohol by volume, 55 IBUs at the time of review. I don't know exactly how old this bottle is, but it does have a best by date of January 12th of 2023, and we're just over 4 months away from that date, so we should be fine. Now, this beer really confuses me. Why? The first time I had this beer was probably about 10 years ago, like 2011, 12, somewhere in that range, and it was just called Harvest Ale. And anywhere you read their website, Beer Advocate, Rate Beer, whatever back then, they referenced this as an English ESB, or extra strong bitter. They talk about how they use English hops and whatnot. Then a couple years later, in the mid 2010s, they changed it to Harvest Special Ale. Everything stayed the same: the ABV, the IBUs, what they the write up, the description of the beer. Fine, they changed the label. That's cool. But then in 2020, I believe it was 2020, might have been 2019, but pretty sure it was 2020, they changed this to an Autumn IPA. Now, the ABV has stayed the same. The IBUs have stayed the same. But instead of saying English hops, they now say American hops. So it seems as though they changed the recipe somewhat. ABV, IBV is the same, but they changed up the hops. Or maybe they're saying American hops instead of English hops because, since this is American brewery, maybe that sells more. I don't know. Same thing with, labeling it an Autumn IPA probably sells more than an English ESB. I had this on tap at the brewery in downtown Buffalo late last year before a Sabres game, and it seemed very similar to when I first had it, but maybe a little bit more of like a piney grapefruit thing. Didn't taste exactly like an ESB, let's just say that, or how I remember it, but it didn't change significantly, at least from what I recall. So if anybody out there knows what's going on with this beer, let me know, because I think the recipe has changed somewhat, but only slightly, because ABV, IBUs, all that stuff, the same. Their write-up is very similar, but they just say American hops instead of English hops. So I don't know. Confusing. I feel if you're going to change up a beer's recipe to some degree, I always like you just call it a new beer, right? And retire the old one. But whatever. I'm not Southern Tier, and they can do what they want, obviously. So I've always liked the the artwork, very simplistic. They're talking about harvest beers, like during the fall months and whatnot, when the harvest comes and all that stuff, right? So that's what it goes for. You got the farmer on there with his wheat and everything. Pretty simplistic label, but it's kind of recognizable here in the Western New York area. Anyway, yeah, it has that like copper orange color, finger of a very lightly tanned, creamy looking head. Good clarity, you can see through it quite a bit. Yeah, very nice looking beer. Does it look like an ESB to some degree? I don't know how it's going to look on camera, but yeah, in person, sure, I would definitely say that has an ESB look to it. Let's get a nose. Yeah. So, it smells kind of like an ESB or just like a bitter. It has. So last year when I was having, I said it was more piney and grapefruity, and I remember this one being more like earthy, slightly herbal, maybe a little bit of like a spicy. Some people would maybe say copper coin, like a slightly metallic thing. But for me, it was always like earthy and herbaceous. And that's kind of how this one smells. It's earthy, it's herbaceous. Maybe a little bit of like a piney grapefruit thing, but not much. There's a real nice like toasted biscuit kind of malt character, maybe toasted bread, a little bit of caramel. Slight hints of toffee, but that like toasted biscuit kind of hitting the palate first. Yeah, toasted biscuit, a little bit of caramel, a little bit of coffee. Definitely the malt's hitting. I almost get like a slight like copper coin, pennies, slight metallic. This honestly smells like I remember it smelling, 10 years ago. The one I had on tap might have been a little bit older, or maybe it was a fresher batch. I don't know. It smelled a little bit different last year. But I'll tell you right now, based on the nose alone, this smells exactly like it did when I first had it. We'll see if it tastes like it. Anyway, cheers, everyone. All right, so the taste is, it's like someone took an ESB and hopped it up. It's kind of what I'm feeling. Because there is a little bit more of that slightly like pine sap, resiny type of hop feel, and a little bit of like a zesty grapefruit. But it's not like over the top, because you do get the other characters. So let's review this properly. Body and mouthfeel. Body, this is medium, maybe a touch over, really nice, 6.7%. The mouthfeel, It's crisp. It's spritzy on the palate, but not overdone. Has a nice smoothness on the finish. Body mouthfeel, really nice. If you're going for like an ESB or like a hybrid with like an IPA or something, I think the body's nice for the ABV. I think the mouthfeel is proper. The taste, again, it's like if new school English ESBs existed, this is kind of what I feel like it would be. Biscuity, toasted biscuit, toasted bread, right at the forefront, caramel, a little bit of toffee. That hits me right at the tip of the tongue as it passes through. A little bit of that earthy, herbaceous, almost slightly metallic kind of thing. But then the grapefruit is introduced a little bit, and then on the finish is that like pine sap. But again, it's not super big. This is not boisterous. It's not punching me in the face with that. It's sweet up front. We'll say there's a moderate bitterness on the finish. It's a semi-dry. So very well balanced, maybe even leaning a little bit more bitter because this has a nice moderate bitterness, 55 IBUs, kind of an old school recipe. So that bitterness is definitely there, but it's not like gripping and too much. Very easy to drink at almost 7%. No alcohol detected. A little bit maybe of warming in the chest, very minute, but nothing on the palate. This is like 95% what I remember it being back again 10, 11 years ago. Again, my palate was in a completely different place. I didn't like hop forward beers. So maybe it wasn't as hop forward back then, kind of like an ESB, even though it's called an English ESB extra strong bitter. They typically have a good balance to them. It's not like they're super bitter or anything. So this might be a little bit more bitter and a little bit more pungency to the hops than I remember. So maybe that's why maybe they just decided, hey, this has more of like an IPA feel to it than an ESB. So we're just going to say it's an Autumn IPA. Plus that acronym IPA sells. It really does. IPA sell. Everybody knows that, but that's maybe what Southern Tier came up with. So I don't know if anybody out there really knows what has happened with this recipe, what they changed specifically, if they changed anything or they just changed the labeling, because it feels like a very familiar recipe to the old ones. I feel like the one I had on tap, but again, that was part of a flight. I had like 8, maybe like, 2 different flights. It gets lost. You don't, exactly taste it 100% because you've, already had other beer with it. So yeah, I mean, this is good. I've never loved this beer. I've always enjoyed it. So it's nothing that, is like amazing to me, but it was always one of those where I'd pick up a bottle almost every year when it got released. So that was pretty much the extent of it. But yeah, Harvest, the 2022 release, Southern Tier's Autumn IPA. I have no problems giving this one a go a high 3.75. We'll go 3.85, almost in the low 4s. I think that's a fair score. Again, I'm not shouting from the rooftops about this, how amazing this is. But I do know a lot of people who used to buy like a case of this every single year and just love it because it does have that kind of slightly old school American IPA vibe. But I think it's a little bit more malt forward and a little bit more balanced than a lot of those beers. Yeah, really nice. I enjoy it. I almost just got a little bit of like a honey aroma. A honey flavor too in there. So price and availability. This is like 10, 11 bucks a 6-pack in my neck of the woods. Might be a little bit more expensive outside of New York State, but even like 12, 13 bucks for a 6-pack, not bad. You're talking about 6.7% Autumn IPA. Can't go wrong. And availability, wherever you see Southern Tier, you should see this beer only because this is like one of their, this is like their fall seasonal outside of Pumpkin and like Warlock and the Pumpkin series. This is like the fall seasonal that they usually come out with. And then the winter seasonal after this is Old Man Winter, another good malty beer. But yeah, if you've had this one before, let me know what you think about it. Did you have this beer 10 plus years ago? Do you remember when it was just called Harvest Ale? Do you remember when they changed it to Harvest Special Ale? What have they done here? Have you had it in the last 3 years? What do you think? You think it's the same recipe? Maybe they just wanted to change up the description of the beer. So they said American hops instead of English hops. I don't know where I land. I just feel like this is almost identical to what I remember this beer being back in the early to mid 2010s. So that's where I'm going to stick with. Anyway, appreciate everybody stopping by for another beer review here on the Beer Patrol. To the next one. Cheers.